A big, massive hello to all you spookers out there. Welcome to the very first episode of the Zillennial Spooks. I'm Sean, and I am so excited, and honestly, I'm also a little nervous to be kicking things off today. First things first, thank you so much for pressing play. Whether you stumbled on this by accident or you meant to be here, I'm glad you are. Now, just a quick heads up, since this is my very first episode, you might notice a few rough edges, maybe a weird cut here, a strange pause there, or me tripping over my words because I forgot what I was saying halfway through, which happens pretty often. But we're only human. I'm still learning the ropes when it comes to editing and podcasting in general, so thank you in advance for your patience with any little quirks and audio hiccups. I promise it'll get smoother as we go, or at least that's the goal. I cannot wait to dive in. So let's get started and see where this thing goes. Just thought I'd get this in at the beginning. So this episode has been a long time coming. And that's because it's actually a revised version of one that I started ages ago about some of the haunted goings on in Wythenshawe. I wanted to really do it justice with the creepy vibes and all, so I took a bit of extra time to dig a little deeper, tweak a few things, and make it the spooky gem it deserves to be. Thanks for being patient. And now, let's get into the weird stuff. Welcome back to Zillennial Spooks. I know that this episode has been a very long time coming, but there's good reason for that. What you're about to hear is a revised and reworked journey into one of Manchester's most unexpected paranormal hotspots, Wythenshawe. Now, if you're a local, you might be raising an eyebrow. Haunted Wythenshawe, really? But stick with me. Behind the everyday houses, tower blocks and shopping centres, Wythenshawe holds some seriously strange and eerie stories. Hidden histories, whispered tales passed down through families, and the kind of creepy experiences that make people turn the lights on before bed. We've gathered them all. There's odd halls with dark pasts, woods where people swear they've seen things they can't explain, and homes where footsteps echo long after the last person's gone to sleep. Some of these stories are rooted in history, others come straight from locals who experienced them firsthand. This episode took longer than expected, mostly because we wanted to go back, dig deeper, and give these stories the attention they deserve. It's not just about ghosts, it's about the way places carry memories, energy, and the occasional chill down your spine. So get comfortable, or maybe don't, and join us as we uncover the haunted happenings of Wythenshawe. So, what exactly are we diving into today? Well, first up is the crown jewel of Wythenshawe's haunted history, Wythenshawe Hall. A stunning old manor house with centuries of history and more than a few ghost stories clinging to its timber beams. We'll be digging into the reports of shadowy figures, strange noises, and the lingering presence of something or someone that just doesn't want to leave. Then, we're heading to somewhere a bit more modern and a lot louder, Manchester Airport. Believe it or not, even amongst the hustle of flights, terminals and announcements, there are tales of ghostly sightings, from vanishing figures near the old terminal buildings to eerie sensations of staff-only areas. the airport has its own unexpected layer of paranormal weirdness. But the real chaos, that's waiting for us in Benchill. We'll be looking at the infamous Benchill Poltergeist, a case that had locals talking for years. We're talking objects flying, appliances turning on by themselves, and a family at their wits' end. Classic poltergeist behaviour, right in the middle of our council estate. And finally, we'll be heading to a chilling local legend, the Benchill Grey Lady. She's been spotted near bus stops, alleyways, and even inside people's homes. A ghostly woman in grey who appears and disappears without trace. Who is she? Why does she linger? And why does everyone who sees her say the same thing? That she just doesn't feel quite human. These are the stories we'll be unpacking. Part local legend, part urban myth, part maybe there's more to this than we thought. So whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or just here for the creepy vibes, stick around because Wythenshawe has some ghosts, and tonight we're going to be looking for them. Before we get into the ghost stories, let's take a quick look around Wythenshawe itself, because understanding the place helps to make sense why it may be home to so many strange happenings. Wythenshawe sits in the south of Manchester, and for a long time it was just countryside, your fields, your farms, and a few old estates dotted around, but everything changed in the 1920s and 30s when Manchester City Council bought the land to create one of the country's first garden cities. It was meant to be a healthier, greener escape from the overcrowded slums in the inner city, a kind of suburban utopia. Fast forward to now, and Wythenshawe is one of the largest housing estates in Europe. It's a place that's been through a lot of change, and like a lot of places with deep roots, some of these old stories never quite went away, which brings us to one of its oldest buildings, and easily its most haunted, Wythenshawe Hall. Tucked away in Wythenshawe Park, this timber-framed Tudor manor dates back to the 16th century. It was home to the Tatton family for over 400 years, and if the walls could talk, they'd have plenty to say. Civil war, family drama, secret rooms, and of course, ghost stories. This place has it all. People have reported seeing figures in period clothing, hearing footsteps when no one's there, and even feeling watched whilst walking the grounds. The energy around the hall is different, and the deeper you dig into its past, the stranger it gets. Let's start there, with the history of the hall and the spirits that may still be hanging round. Wythenshawe Hall is one of those places that feels like it's holding on to something. History, memory, maybe even more than that. Built in the mid-1500s by Robert Tatton, the hall stayed in the Tatton family for nearly 4 centuries. It's a classic Tudor manor, black and white timbered walls, hidden staircases, and sprawling grounds that felt like they've seen everything from high society to heartbreak. And they kind of have. One of the most dramatic chapters in its history came during the English Civil War. The hall was occupied by royalist forces, loyal to King Charles I, while the surrounding area was under parliamentarian control. In 1644, Wythenshawe Hall was under siege for 3 months, eventually falling to the Roundheads. That left its mark, both literally and some say spiritually. By the early 20th century, the Tatton family had moved out, and the hall, along with the land around it, was gifted to the people of Manchester. It became part of Wythenshawe Park and opened to the public, which is when the ghost stories really started to surface. And there are plenty. From shadowy figures spotted in the upstairs corridors to sudden cold spots and the sound of footsteps echoing through empty rooms, Wythenshawe Hall has the hallmarks of a classic haunting. Some say it's the spirit of a soldier from the Civil War. Others believe it's a former servant still going about their duties. There's even talk of a woman in white seen gazing out from one of the upper windows long after the building is supposed to be emptied. Whatever it is, people who visit the hall often say the same thing. It feels like you're being watched. So what's really going on behind those old wooden walls? Let's take a closer look at the ghostly residence of Wythenshawe Hall. Alright, let's talk about what people have actually seen and felt inside Wythenshawe Hall. One of the most frequently reported encounters is with a shadowy figure seen moving through the upstairs corridors. Staff and visitors alike have spoken about glimpsing something out the corner of their eye. A tall, dark silhouette, but when they turn to look properly, there's no one there. A few have even gone looking, thinking it was another guest or colleague, only to find the hallway completely empty. There's also the footsteps. They're so common that staff have apparently gotten used to them. Light steps on old wooden floors, sometimes overhead, sometimes coming from around the corner, and again, no one in sight. Some say the steps stop when you call out, and others say they just keep going. One of the eerie stories comes from a former volunteer who was locking up late one evening. They were doing the final walkthrough, just checking the rooms, when they heard a woman humming. Soft, almost like a lullaby, coming from one of the upper rooms. Thinking maybe someone had stayed behind, they went back to check. The room was empty, dead silent. And when they went back upstairs, the front door, which they were sure had been locked, was standing wide open. And then there's the woman in white, possibly the hall's most famous ghost. She's been spotted in an upstairs window, usually in the early evening, just standing and looking out across the park grounds. Always still, always silent. Some say she's a former lady of the house, watching for someone who never returned from war. Others say she's tied to something much older, maybe even predating the Civil War entirely. Some believe she might actually be Mary Webb, a servant who lived and worked at the hall in the 17th century. According to local legend, Mary died under tragic circumstances. Some say of heartbreak, others whisper of something darker, and ever since she's been tied to the place, watching, waiting. The story goes that Mary, a servant at the hall, fell in love, possibly with a soldier stationed at the hall during the siege, or with someone she wasn't supposed to be seen with. Some versions say it was a secret affair with a member of the Tatton family. Others claim it was a parliamentarian soldier who died during the siege. Either way, it ended in heartbreak. One version of the tale says Mary was found dead in one of the upstairs rooms. Some say she took her own life. Others hint at something more sinister, and from that moment on, people begun with reporting strange things. Cold drafts in old quarters, the sound of crying at night, and eventually sightings of a woman in a pale gown staring out of the window. She became known as the Woman in White, though those who knew the legend call her by name Mary Webb. Even today people claim to see her. Some say she drifts silently through the upstairs corridors. Others have spotted her in the gardens, just beyond the windows, vanishing before they can get a second look. Is she mourning love? Trapped by tragedy? Or is her spirit simply woven into the walls of Wythenshawe Hall, unable or unwilling to leave? And it's not just the hall itself that holds onto strange energy. Wythenshawe Park as a whole has its share of spooky tales. The grounds are beautiful by day. Open fields, thick woodland, winding paths, expensive ice cream, but at night it's a different story. Ask around and you'll hear whispers of figures moving in the trees, cold spots on summer nights, and even disembodied voices echoing along the paths. One of the most commonly reported sightings is a dark figure seen walking near the walled garden, usually around dusk or just after. People describe seeing someone tall, dressed in black, my type of man, silently pacing the garden path. They always assume it's a park ranger or a late jogger until they get closer and the figure vanishes, just gone, like it was never there. There's also talk of phantom children near the old stable area. Laughter echoing when no one's around. Small footsteps heard behind you, but when you turn, there's no one in sight. A few dog walkers have even said their dog refuses to go down certain paths, pulling hard on the lead, tails between their legs, and animals know. And then there's a more recent tale, one that popped up online in local forums and community pages. People have reported seeing a woman in Victorian dress walking through the woods just behind the hall. Some say she's holding a lantern, others say she just flats. Always silent, always disappearing the moment you look away. Now, here's a really strange one, a story that pops up occasionally in local legend and whispered conversations. It's not as well known as the ghost of the hall or the woman in white, but it's definitely one of the creepiest. People talk about seeing monks, or rather half monks, gliding silently across parts of Wythenshawe Park and even near some of the older buildings in the area. What do I mean by half monks? Well, these figures are reportedly seen from the waist up, robes, hoods, even what looks like the outline of a rosary or hand held in prayer, but nothing below the waist. No legs, no feet, just floating torsos moving in eerie silence a few feet above the ground. And here's where it gets interesting. Some believe these ghostly monks are tied to ancient tunnels, old religious pathways that may have once run beneath the land, connecting to monasteries, chapels, or safe houses during times of persecution. Over the centuries, these tunnels would have been buried deeper or collapsed entirely, so if the spirits are still walking those original paths, they're no longer walking at ground level. That's why the theory goes, we see only the top half. They're still moving along their usual routes, just several feet below today's surface. It's a chilling thought, ghostly monks, trapped in some long-forgotten corridor, endlessly repeating a journey no one remembers through a landscape that's changed around them. Some sightings are near the wooded area behind Wythenshawe Hall. Others near the old gatehouses or boundary lines, always silent, always half down, almost like they don't want to see us, or worse, like they're aware but simply don't care anymore. Just one of the many reasons Wythenshawe Park, for all its peaceful daytime beauty, carries a completely different energy after dark. But here's the thing, there's no actual historical evidence of a monastic presence in Wythenshawe itself. The land that makes up Wythenshawe Park was originally part of the Tasman family estate, going back to at least the 13th century. A 1297 charter mentions it as a deer park, but not a religious site. And while there were many monastic houses elsewhere in Greater Manchester, like Gorton Monastery or Kersal Priory, none were located anywhere near this empty piece of land that was Wythenshawe. So if these ghostly monks aren't connected to a real monastery, where did the legend come from? It could be local imagination filling in the blanks. Old buildings, ancient trees, and centuries of history tend to inspire stories, especially when they're passed down through generations. It might even be a case of mistaken identity, a spirit in a long cloak or robe misinterpreted as a monk. Still, folklore has its own kind of truth, whether they were real or not. The half-bodied monks are now part of Wythenshawe's haunted identity, a ghost story stitched into the landscape. So, we've wandered through haunted halls, ghostly gardens, and floating monks, and now it's time to head somewhere completely different. You might not expect to find ghost stories in a place filled with boarding calls, Pret sandwiches, and duty-free perfume, but Manchester Airport has a few secrets of its own. Before it became the massive international hub it is today, Manchester Airport had much humbler beginnings. It opened in 1938, originally known as Ringway Airport, and it played a huge role in World War II. The site was used by the Royal Air Force and even became home to aircraft manufacturing and training for paratroopers. Over the years, it's grown into the third busiest airport in the UK, but its wartime history, it never really left. In fact, it might even explain some of the strange sightings and experiences people have had over the years, both in the terminals and behind the scenes in staff-only areas. From ghostly airmen to figures vanishing into thin air near runways, there's something about Manchester Airport that seems to attract or maybe hang on to energy from the past. Let's take a look at the most chilling encounters reported at the airport and ask the question, what happens when a place built for departures can't quite let go of what's already gone. Alright, then, let's look into one of the airport's most unsettling legends. There's a figure seen often, but never for long, always the same description. A man, late middle age, dressed in a perfectly kept pilot's uniform, classic RAF style, cap tilted just right, a face that seems familiar, like someone you might have seen in a black and white photo in a museum or an old war film. He's most often seen in Terminal 1, especially around the gate lounges at night or in the glass walkways overlooking the runway. People say he walks slowly, purposely, as if he's just heading for a flight. Except when you look away and glance back, he's gone completely, no trace. And here's where it gets proper spooky. Multiple staff members, we're talking cleaners, nighttime security, even a couple of shop workers on the late shift, have all told similar stories. Some said they caught a glimpse of him standing behind the glass at gate 13, staring out at the planes. Others have seen him walking towards the gate with his cap in hand, only to vanish into thin air mid-stride. One cleaner, let's call her Linda, worked nights for years at the airport. She told her supervisor she wouldn't go anywhere near gate 13 after 1 a.m. She said she saw the pilot one night just standing there, not moving, as if he was waiting for someone or something. She blinked and he was gone. No sound, just the echo of her own footsteps and the low hum of the terminal lights. Now you might wonder, why a pilot? Why here? Manchester Airport, as Ringway Airport, played a crucial role during World War II. Between 1939 and 1945, it was transformed into a base for the RAF and Air Transport Auxiliary. Hundreds of young pilots passed through those hangars. Some left for training, others for active missions, and some, very sadly, never came back. So here's the theory. Some believe this ghost is one of them, a pilot who died mid-flight or in a crash, still trying to catch his final flight. Others think he might be a flight instructor, someone whose duty never really ended. Maybe he's stuck between times, between takeoff and landing, but here's where it gets really unsettling. A retired airport worker claimed that in the early 90s, someone matched the ghost to a photo they found in an old staff archive. A pilot who trained at Ringway in 1941. The photo showed him standing beside a propeller plane, same cap, same expression, same posture. And the file? It allegedly went missing. Typical, absolutely typical. On the morning of August 19th, 1941, pilot officer Frederick W. Hodinott and leading aircraftman Alan Chadwick took off from RAF Ringway in a Westland Lysander Mark IIIA. Their mission was to provide gunnery and searchlight practice for recruits at the Great Orme training base in North Wales, near Llandudno. However, due to a navigational error, the aircraft veered off course. The crew became disorientated in the crowd-covered skies, mistakenly believing that they were over flat plains of Cheshire. In reality, they'd flown into the Pennines, a mountainous region, and as they descended to avoid the clouds, the aircraft crashed into the moorland near Chew Reservoir, specifically on Slate Pit Moor in Saddleworth. Initially, both airmen survived the crash, but they were trapped beneath the wreckage. They remained there for approximately 36 hours before being discovered. Pilot Officer Hodinot sustained a head injury but was otherwise relatively unharmed. He managed to exit the aircraft and attempted to signal for help. Leading aircraftman Chadwick, however, suffered more severe injuries. He was unable to free himself from the wreckage and was trapped for an extended period. Tragically, he died from his injuries in hospital on August 24th, 1941. So some say the ghost pilot seen by late staff wearing an RAF uniform is just a generic ghost, a symbol of the airport's military past. However, there is another theory. What if he's Alan Chadwick? Think about it. Chadwick died in service, training to protect others. The mission he never finished, aiding gunners, keeping airfields like Ringway safe. Maybe that duty never really ended. Maybe he walks the terminal now. Not lost, but keeping watch. Gate 13 didn't exist in 1941, but if you line up old maps, it's not far from where the military aircraft used to taxi for takeoff. Right where his final flight begun. It's not proof, sure, but a story to go, it fits. So next time you're on a late flight out of Manchester and you see a man in an old pilot's cap standing quietly by the glass, staring out towards the moorland, don't be afraid. Maybe he's just making sure you get home safely. Now let's step inside one of the oldest parts of Manchester Airport, the hangars. These aren't your typical airport warehouses. Some of them date back to the days where the place was known as RAF Ringway, the hub for training aircrew during World War II. If you ever wander near Hangar 7 late at night, staff say you can sometimes hear a faint hum, a low mechanical drone that seems to come from nowhere. Not the usual airport noises, more like the echo of old engines winding up. Airport workers and night shift cleaners have reported hearing strange noises inside Hangar 7. Faint engine roars, the creak of old metal footsteps when no one is walking. One long-time mechanic said he once saw the silhouette of a figure wearing a flight jacket standing by a maintenance pit, only for it to disappear when he blinked. No one knows for sure who or what causes the hum. Some say it's the lingering presence of airmen who trained there, and others say it's the restless spirit of those lost in training accidents, like the crew of the Lysander that crashed near Chew Reservoir in 1941. Whether it's a hum of history though, the hum of hauntings, or just the hum of the old hangar settling in the night, one thing is for sure. RAF Ringway's past is alive in these walls, so if you're ever near Hangar 7 after dark, listen closely. You might just hear the echoes of engines that haven't stopped running for over 80 years. I've just had to stop the recording and change recording locations because it is baking. I'm currently in my bedroom. My thermostat is staying that it's 28 degrees in the living room. So I'm literally cooking in my own juices. Anyway, imagine this. You're piloting a late night flight into Manchester Airport. The runway lights stretch ahead, the engines hum, and then just beyond the tarmac, figures in full Roman battle gear appear. Marching in formation, shields raised, helmets gleaming under the floodlights. It sounds like a scene from a historical epic. But for some pilots and ground crew, it's a reality they've witnessed. Reports of Roman soldiers on the runway of Manchester Airport have surfaced over the years. These apparitions are described as fully armoured legionaries, marching in disciplined rows, seemingly oblivious to the modern world around them. The sightings are so vivid that on at least one occasion, flights were delayed until it was confirmed that the figures were not real people obstructing the runway. Now, before you roll your eyes, let's pause and talk about where Manchester Airport actually is, because it turns out this place has deeper roots than most people realise. Long before the boarding gates and departure lounges, this land was part of the Roman Empire. Back in 79 AD, the Romans built a fort called Mamucium, right where modern-day Manchester stands. It was set up by Agricola, one of Rome's top generals, and strategically placed between Chester and York, two major Roman cities. Mamucium wasn't just a lonely outpost, it was a busy military hub, housing troops and traders, with roads connecting to a much larger network across Roman Britain. The fort grew stone walls replaced wooden ones, and a bustling civilian settlement sprang up alongside it. You can still visit the reconstructed ruins today, tucked in between railway arches, behind the Science and Industry Museum. So how does this connect to the airport? Well, while the airport itself isn't built directly over the Mamucium site, the surrounding area sits on land that's soaked in centuries of Roman movement, roads, camps, patrols, and here's where it gets weird. There have been multiple reports, some from ground staff, others from pilots, of Roman soldiers appearing near the runways. Not stumbling spectres, but disciplined units, marching in step, always quiet, and always in formation. Maybe what people see at the airport is some kind of echo from that ancient military life, a legion that once marched through northern Britannia, now buried in the ground itself. Now, the Roman soldiers are just one of many strange stories from Manchester Airport. There are tales of a blue orb floating above old hangars, whispering footsteps in the now demolished RAF barracks, and even a woman in 1940s attire spotted weeping near the perimeter. But as much as we'd love to stay among the terminal and taxiways, it's time to shift gears, because our next case takes us away from the runway and straight into a domestic nightmare. We're headed to the suburbs, to a quiet cul-de-sac where cutlery flew, furniture moved, and a house went to war with itself. Next up, the Benchill Poltergeist. In the early 1990s, a family in Benchill, a suburb of Wythenshawe, found themselves at the centre of a terrifying poltergeist phenomenon. What began as a typical move into a new home quickly escalated into a series of events that defied logical explanation and left the family fearing for their safety. Shortly after moving into their new home in Benchill, the family began to experience a series of disturbing events. One of the most prominent and unsettling aspects of the reported activity involved the movement of objects within the home. Family members reported that everyday items such as plates, cups, and ornaments were found displaced or had been thrown across rooms. These objects often landed in positions that suggested deliberate movement, rather than accidental displacement. The force and precision with which these items were said to have moved raised questions about the nature of the disturbances. In addition to smaller items, large pieces of furniture were also reported to have shifted positions. Chairs and tables were allegedly found moved from their original spots, sometimes in the middle of the room with no one present to account for the changes. These occurrences were particularly alarming as they involved heavy objects that would require significant force to move. The movement of objects were often accompanied by strange noises, including loud bangs and scraping sounds. These noises were reported to occur without any apparent cause. One of the most reported phenomena was the sound of footsteps echoing through empty rooms. Family members and visitors alike heard distinct footsteps, often described as heavy or deliberate, when no one was present. These sounds were particularly eerie during the night, when the house was otherwise silent. Another common occurrence involved doors slamming shut with force, despite no one being near them. These sudden, loud noises startled the family and left them perplexed, as the doors would often be found closed without explanation. Residents reported hearing scratching noises coming from the walls and floors, as well as knocking sounds that seemed to move from room to room. These noises were persistent and occurred at various times, contributing to the overall sense of unease within the home. Some individuals claimed to have heard faint voices and whispers, particularly when alone in certain areas of the house. These voices were often unintelligible but added to the chilling atmosphere reported by the family. Another alarming aspect of the Benchill Poltergeist case were the physical interactions reported by the family, moments when the presence seemed to cross from unseen noises and movements into direct, tangible contact. The most notable claim came from Claire, the mum in the house. She reported being pushed down a flight of stairs by an invisible force. This wasn't a fleeting touch or a light brush, but a forceful shove that resulted in a real physical fall. Claire's account was taken seriously by investigators because it involved clear physical harm, not just a feeling of presence. Alongside with physical pushes, Claire described seeing a shadowy figure resembling a monk. Witnesses say this figure appeared to be wearing robes and was sometimes accompanied by a smaller, ghostly child. This apparition wasn't just a vague shadow, it had a form and movement, enough to leave a lasting impression on Claire and others. Other residents and visitors reported fleeting glimpses of indistinct humanoid shadows moving through rooms or standing silently in corners. These figures lacked clear features but had a presence that was unmistakably human in shape. The apparitions were often seen moving purposefully, not just flickering in and out. Some described the figures as pacing or watching silently, adding a sense of being observed by an unseen presence. With strange sounds, violent movements, and eerie figures haunting the home, the Benchill family felt that they had no choice but to reach out for help. They weren't just frightened, they were exhausted, mentally and physically worn down by the constant sense that they were not alone. That's when the investigation began. The first response came from St. Luke's Church in Benchill. A local priest agreed to visit the house after hearing the disturbances. His role was largely spiritual. He conducted a blessing of the home, a common first step in cases where people believe supernatural forces may be at work. Although no dramatic change was noted afterward, the family reported a temporary sense of relief, which, unfortunately, didn't last. Within days, the phenomena resumed and in some cases, appeared to intensify. Next, the family turned to the Stockport Ghost Society, a local paranormal research group known for investigating hauntings across Greater Manchester. Members of the society visited the property and spent time speaking with the family, documenting their experience and conducting informal on-site investigations. Their methods were observational rather than scientific, monitoring the atmosphere in the home using basic tools like EMF detectors, cameras, and audio recorders. They didn't report capturing any conclusive evidence, but noted a strong sense of unease and even dizziness experienced by multiple investigators in specific areas of the house, often cited in paranormal cases as a sign of unusual environmental activity. As the disturbances in the Benchill home intensified even more, the family sought help from numerous religious figures, including nuns from a nearby convent. Nuns from the convent in Sharston, located on Altrincham Road, visited the family home to offer assistance. They provided Claire with a crucifix, a common religious symbol believed to offer protection against malevolent forces. This gesture was part of their efforts to support the family during this challenging time. In addition to the crucifix, the nuns participated in prayers and blessings within the home. These spiritual practices are often employed in attempts to cleanse spaces believed to be affected by negative energies or entities. The family's hope was that these religious interventions would bring peace and end the unsettling occurrences. Despite the spiritual efforts, the disturbances did not cease. Claire reported that the entity continued to manifest, sometimes with increased intensity. This outcome left the family feeling both supported and disheartened, as the expected relief did not materialise. The involvement of the convent underscores the depth of the family's distress and their willingness to seek help from various sources. It also highlights the broader community's awareness and concern for the situation. However, the continued disturbances suggest that the Benchill Poltergeist case remains one of the most perplexing and unsettling paranormal events in the region. So what exactly happened in that Benchill home? Some believe it was classic poltergeist activity, a spirit trying to get attention, not necessarily malicious, but certainly disruptive. Others point to psychological explanations like stress, grief, or suggestion, especially in a close family unit under pressure. A few theories veer towards the parapsychological, suggesting unconscious telekinetic energy, particularly from emotionally charged individuals, might have been at play. And of course, there is also the simplest explanation, a mix of misinterpreted natural events and the human mind trying to make sense of the unknown. What happened to the family, or the haunting? That's anyone's guess. No real information exists publicly that reveals whether the family stayed, whether the hauntings ceased, or whether they are still felt to this day. Whatever the cause, the experiences have left a lasting impression on the lore of this town. But Benchill's strange happenings don't stop there, because just a few streets away, there has been sightings of another figure entirely. A solitary woman in grey, seen drifting silently through the fog near a housing estate. Not far from the Benchill Poltergeist house, locals have reported sightings of a spectral woman dressed in grey, who appears without warning, never speaks, and disappears just as suddenly as she arrives. They call her the Grey Lady of Benchill. Reports of the Grey Lady span decades. She's usually seen late at night or in the early morning, often near older parts of the estate or on paths bordering open land. Witnesses describe her as tall, pale, and dressed in outdated clothing, typically long grey garments that resemble either a morning dress or an old-fashioned nurse's uniform. In nearly every account she's silent. She doesn't approach, she doesn't react. She simply stands or glides by, seemingly unaware of those who see her, or maybe ignoring them. Some drivers passing through have claimed she appears directly in the road, only to vanish before impact. Others have seen her outside homes, looking in through windows, or standing motionless under street lamps, before fading into darkness. The legend of the Grey Lady of Benchill has been a part of local folklore for generations, with tales of a spectral woman in a grey dress haunting the area near Picnic Corner. This boggy patch of land, once a pond, has been the subject of numerous sightings and stories, often serving as a cautionary tale for children. In 2019, the legend resurfaced when Wythenshawe Community Housing Group, the social housing trust that owns the land, submitted plans to build 4 bungalows on the site. The proposed aim was to address the chronic shortages of social housing in Manchester, describing the 2,173 square metre area as an underused greenfield site with good access to public amenities. The planning application sparked renewed interest in the Grey Lady legend. Residents and local historians recalled various versions of the story, including one where a woman escaped from captivity in a nearby castle and drowned in the pond. Another version suggested a young Victorian maid who died when a horse and cart fell into the bog. Despite the area's transformation over the years, including the filling in of the pond and its development into a public green space, the stories persist. The proposed development by WCHG brought the legend back into public conversation, highlighting the enduring nature of local myths and their impact on community identity. Whilst the planning application was part of efforts to meet the housing needs, it also reignited discussions about the area's haunted reputation. The Grey Lady's story continues to be a cherished part of local folklore, offering a glimpse into the cultural tapestry of Wythenshawe and the enduring power of storytelling in shaping community heritage. Before we go any further, I want to share something personal. My fascination with the paranormal in Wythenshawe isn't just about ghost stories or local legends. It's about something real, something that happened to me. You see, I grew up in Wythenshawe and I lived in what I can only describe as a haunted house. It started subtly. The pendant lights started swaying, odd cold spots on summer days. At first, it was blamed on drafts coming up through our old floorboards. You know, the usual. But then came the footsteps. Upstairs, when no one was home, objects would go missing and turn up in strange places. My family heard voices, faint like whispers, through the wall. We never got a clear explanation. No dramatic exorcism, just the constant creeping fear that we weren't alone. The experience shaped the way I looked at stories like the ones we've been sharing today, the Benchill Poltergeist and the Grey Lady and others. I know what it feels like to try and explain the unexplainable, to be taken half seriously, or not at all, when something truly strange is happening. So when I talk about Wythenshawe's hauntings, it's not just curiosity for me, it's personal. And maybe if you're listening from the area, you've felt it too. Before we wrap up this segment, I want to say, I know some of you have reached out to me about your own strange experiences in Wythenshawe, and I've shared just a glimpse of mine. But I promise you this, in a future episode, I'll take you deeper into the house I grew up in, right here in Wythenshawe, and the things that happened there. The footsteps, the whispers, the moments we still don't talk about that much. It won't be legend, it won't be second hand. It'll be my story and my family's, and it's one I think you'll want to hear, because sometimes the scariest stories are the true ones. It may seem like Wythenshawe has more than its fair share of ghost stories, from violent chaos of the Benchill Poltergeist, the mournful Grey Lady, to eerie wartime hauntings near Manchester Airport, but what makes this area such a hotspot for paranormal activity? What makes this area such a hotspot? There's no single answer, but a few clues in Wythenshawe's history, geography and transformation might help to explain it. Wythenshawe may be known today for its housing estates, but it sits on land that has been inhabited for centuries. Wythenshawe Hall dates back to before the 16th century. Much of modern Wythenshawe was built in the 1930s and post-World War II era, but it sits closely to Manchester Airport, formerly RAF Ringway, a key military site during World War II. Ringway was home to paratrooper training, secret missions and wartime accidents, tragedies and death, some documented and others lost to time, are often cited in paranormal theory as leaving residual energy. It's no surprise ghost sightings, including a phantom pilot, have been reported near airport grounds and transport links. In the 20th century, Wythenshawe saw massive change, from rural countryside to one of the UK's largest council estates. Large-scale demolition and construction may have disturbed older land, burial grounds, unmarked graves. Ghost stories often spike after major land disruption. Some paranormal researchers suggest it's a trigger for latent energy or entities. Some researchers believe that areas with economic hardship, isolation or tight-knit communities tend to preserve local legacy and foster belief in the supernatural. Wythenshawe has long had strong community bonds, and with that comes a powerful oral tradition of storytelling and belief. And when strange things happen, people talk, and those stories grow. And finally, Wythenshawe is haunted because its people say it is. And belief matters. Ghost stories are how communities make sense of history, process grief, and explain the unexplainable. Whether real or imagined, they become part of the landscape. So, is Wythenshawe more haunted than other places? Or are its ghosts just louder? Maybe it's both, maybe it's neither. But one thing's for sure, this part of Manchester has more than enough ghost stories to keep the lights on at night, and we're not done telling them. That's it for this episode, and whether you're a long-term believer or just ghost curious, thank you so much for tuning in, exploring the haunted corners of Wythenshawe, from poltergeists and grey ladies to my own childhood home, briefly. It's been a deeply personal journey, and I'm glad you came along for the ride. If you have your own strange experiences in the area, I'd love to hear them. You can message the show, share your stories, or even join us in a future episode. Until then, keep your eyes open, keep asking questions, and maybe keep a light on. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.